Ronan Dawson's life had always been relatively ordinary. Born and raised in one of Earth's far-flung colonies, Orion 3, his days were filled with the repetitive but comforting tasks of an engineer. He loved his work. There was a certain beauty in machinery. Machines were predictable, logical, and always followed the rules of the universe. They didn't break down without a reason, and when they did, there was always a way to fix them. The colony on Orion 3 wasn't much to look at. Set on a barren, rocky planet, the colony was mostly underground, with towering domes shielding the few surface structures from the unforgiving elements outside. A dusty, red sky constantly loomed overhead, and there was no plant life, no rivers, nothing but endless crags and dry wastelands. But it was home, and Ronan had come to love it for its quiet solitude. No one bothered him, and in turn, he didn't bother anyone. But his peace was shattered one fateful morning when the Zurai emissaries arrived. The Zurai were an alien race known throughout the galaxy, both feared and respected for their vast empire that spanned multiple star systems. They were humanoid in form but much taller than humans, with iridescent skin that shimmered like scales, and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Their features were sharp, almost crystalline, and their voices held a musical quality, like the tinkling of wind chimes in a storm. Ronan had heard of the Zurai, of course, but had never imagined they would take any interest in someone like him. He was working on repairing a malfunctioning ventilation unit in one of the colony's main domes when his wrist communicator beeped urgently. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he glanced at the message. His supervisor had summoned him to the colony's central hall immediately. Grumbling under his breath about the sudden interruption, Ronan packed up his tools and made his way to the central hall. As he approached, he noticed something unusual. The entire building was surrounded by guards, both human and Zurai. It was the first time he had ever seen Zurai soldiers up close, and they were an intimidating sight. Each one stood at least 7 feet tall, their armor gleaming under the artificial lights of the dome. Their helmets were adorned with intricate designs, and their eyes, though hidden behind visors, seemed to pierce through Ronan. "What's going on?" he muttered to himself as he passed the guards, their eyes following him with a cold, impassive gaze. Inside the hall, the tension was palpable. A large crowd had gathered, consisting of both human colonists and Zurai officials. At the center of the hall stood a group of Zurai emissaries, their robes adorned with royal insignias. They radiated an air of authority, their presence alone commanding silence from the crowd. Ronan had barely stepped into the hall when one of the emissaries gestured for him to come forward. Confused and feeling a growing sense of unease, he walked hesitantly toward the group. Ronan Dawson, the tallest of the emissaries, began, his voice deep and resonant. "You have been summoned here for a matter of great importance." Ronan blinked, glancing around at the expectant faces. He had no idea what was going on, but the way everyone was staring at him made his skin crawl. I think there's been some mistake," he said nervously, scratching the back of his neck. "I'm just an engineer." "There is no mistake," the emissary said firmly. "The Zurai Empire has chosen you." Ronan's heart skipped a beat. "Chosen me? For what?" The crowd around him seemed to hold its collective breath as the emissary continued. "You have been selected to marry Princess Vera, daughter of the Zurai Emperor and future ruler of our empire." For a moment, Ronan thought he hadn't heard correctly. Marry a Zurai princess? Him? It didn't make any sense. He was just an average guy, living a quiet life. Why would an intergalactic empire want anything to do with him? His confusion must have been evident, because the emissary's expression softened slightly. "It is an honor, Ronan Dawson. The Zurai Empire seeks an alliance with Earth, and this marriage will seal that bond." The murmur of the crowd grew louder as the implications of the emissary's words sank in. A marriage between a human and a Zurai princess? The political ramifications were staggering, but Ronan wasn't thinking about politics. His mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of which made sense. Marry a princess? A Zurai princess? He had never even met a Zurai in person before today, and now they were asking him to marry into their royal family? I don't understand," he stammered. "Why me?" The emissary's expression grew colder, more formal. "You have been chosen because of your humanity. Your species has been observed for its resilience, adaptability, and unique biological traits. The princess requires a partner who embodies these qualities." Ronan's blood ran cold. He had heard rumors about Princess Vera. While the Zurai were known for their beauty, Vera was said to be the exception. Tales of her grotesque appearance had spread through the galaxy, whispered in hushed tones. She was described as the ugliest princess in the universe, a creature of nightmares, even by Zurai standards. He swallowed hard, his mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. They couldn't seriously expect him to marry someone like her. "I'm sorry," Ronan said, shaking his head, "but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this." The crowd erupted into whispers, and the emissary's eyes narrowed. "This is not a request, Ronan Dawson. To refuse would be to insult the Zurai Empire, an insult that would have dire consequences for both you and your people." Ronan's heart pounded in his chest. He had no choice. If he refused, it could mean the end of peaceful relations between Earth and the Zurai Empire. It could lead to war, and all of that would be on his shoulders. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. What do I need to do?" The emissary nodded approvingly. "You will accompany us to Zurai Prime. The marriage ceremony will take place there. Once you are wed, you will become part of the royal family." Ronan's mind was a whirlwind of fear, confusion, and disbelief. In less than an hour, his entire life had been upended. He had gone from being a simple engineer to a pawn in an intergalactic political game. But as the emissaries began to escort him out of the hall, one thought echoed in his mind above all others. What would happen when he finally met Princess Vera? He wasn't sure he wanted to find out. Chapter 2. Meeting the Princess. The journey to Zurai Prime felt like an eternity. Ronan spent most of the time in a state of numb disbelief, his mind swirling with questions and uncertainties. He had never been off-world before, let alone traveled to a planet in a different star system. The Zurai emissaries provided him with little information about what to expect, only assuring him that the Empire's finest accommodations would be prepared for him. The Zurai transport vessel itself was a marvel of engineering. Far more advanced than any human-made spacecraft, it hummed quietly as it cut through the vacuum of space. The interior was sleek and minimalist, with walls made of some kind of shimmering, metallic material that reflected the light in strange, almost hypnotic patterns. Ronan felt out of place in the vessel's opulent surroundings, as if he were a speck of dirt in a palace of glass. He was given a small cabin to rest in during the journey, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind would race back to the image of Princess Vera. He hadn't seen her yet, but the stories he had heard were enough to fill him with dread. What would she look like? Was she truly as hideous as the rumors suggested? He had heard whispers of Zurai physiology being much different from humans. Perhaps their sense of beauty was equally alien. But the stories spoke of something more sinister than mere cultural differences. They described her as an abomination, a freak of nature even by Zurai standards. The thought twisted in his gut like a knot. How could he marry someone who repulsed him? And yet, he had no choice. His life, and possibly the future of Earth, depended on it. The Zurai emissaries remained aloof, speaking only when absolutely necessary. They made no mention of what awaited Ronan on Zurai Prime, nor did they offer any comforting words about the princess. It was as if they, too, were avoiding the topic, as if discussing her was somehow taboo. Finally, after what felt like days of silent tension, the ship dropped out of hyperspace. Ronan stood by a large viewport, staring out at the Zurai homeworld. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Zurai Prime was a planet of breathtaking beauty, its surface covered in vast cities that glittered like jewels under the light of twin suns. The cities were built of towering, crystalline structures that seemed to grow out of the ground itself, their spires stretching toward the heavens. Between the cities were lush, green landscapes dotted with enormous, shimmering lakes. The atmosphere had an otherworldly quality to it, as if the very air itself was imbued with light. For a moment, Ronan forgot his fears, awestruck by the sheer majesty of the planet. But the moment quickly passed as the ship descended into the atmosphere, heading toward one of the largest cities on the horizon. "This is the capital," one of the emissaries informed him. "The royal palace is located at its center." Ronan nodded, though his throat felt tight. The reality of what was about to happen hit him all at once. He was about to meet Princess Vera, the woman he was destined to marry. His heart pounded in his chest, and his palms felt slick with sweat. The ship touched down in a vast courtyard surrounded by towering crystalline walls. As the doors opened, Ronan was greeted by a scene of opulence that rivaled anything he could have imagined. Zurai nobles, dressed in flowing robes of shimmering fabric, lined the entrance to the palace, their eyes fixed on him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Ronan felt a wave of self-consciousness wash over him. He was just a human, an outsider in this world of regal aliens. He had no idea what they thought of him, but their cold stares made him feel like an insect being scrutinized under a magnifying glass. The lead emissary gestured for him to follow. "The princess is expecting you." The words sent a chill down Ronan's spine. He took a deep breath, his legs feeling like lead as he followed the emissary through the palace gates. The interior of the palace was even more magnificent than the city outside, with walls of polished crystal and floors that gleamed like mirrors. Light filtered in from above, casting a soft, ethereal glow over everything. They led him through a series of grand hallways, each one more lavish than the last, until finally they reached a set of massive doors, intricately carved with swirling patterns that seemed to move when the light caught them just right. "The princess awaits inside," the emissary said, his tone formal and unreadable. Ronan swallowed hard. This was it. There was no turning back now. The doors swung open with a low groan, revealing a large, dimly lit chamber. At the far end of the room, seated on a raised platform, was Princess Vera. Ronan hesitated, his breath catching in his throat as he tried to process what he was seeing. The room was vast and shadowy, the flickering light casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. For a moment, he could barely make out the figure at the end of the chamber, but as his eyes adjusted, her form came into focus. She was taller than any human woman, and even taller than most Zurai he had seen. Her skin was a strange, mottled gray, with patches of what looked like rough, scaly texture running along her arms and neck. Her hair, or what passed for hair, was a mass of thin, tendril-like strands that writhed slightly, as if they were alive. Her face was the most alien thing about her. Where her eyes should have been, there were instead large black orbs that reflected no light, giving her an insect-like appearance. Her nose was little more than a flat ridge, and her mouth. It was wide, far wider than any human's, with thin, sharp lips that stretched across her face. Ronan's stomach lurched. The stories hadn't been exaggerating. Princess Vera was different. She was monstrous, even by Zurai standards. But there was something else, too, something about the way she held herself, the way she stared at him with those cold, black eyes. It wasn't just her appearance that unsettled him. It was the feeling that she could see right through him, that she knew exactly what he was thinking, and that she didn't care. "Welcome, Ronan Dawson," she said, her voice a strange, lilting sound that seemed to echo in the chamber. "I have been expecting you." Ronan's throat was dry, and he struggled to find his voice. "Princess Vera." She smiled, and the sight of her wide, sharp-toothed grin sent a shiver down his spine. "You are surprised by my appearance," she said, as if reading his thoughts. "I expected as much. But do not worry. In time, you will come to understand that there is more to me than what you see." Her words were calm, almost reassuring, but Ronan couldn't shake the unease that gripped him. This was the woman he was supposed to marry? How could he possibly go through with it? Vera rose from her platform and slowly descended the steps toward him. Her movements were graceful, almost hypnotic, and yet there was a strange, predatory air about her, like a predator stalking its prey. "You and I," she said softly, "are bound by fate, Ronan Dawson. Our union will change the course of history for both our people." Ronan could barely breathe as she approached, her towering form looming over him. His mind screamed at him to run, but his feet remained rooted to the ground. "You will see," she whispered, her voice low and chilling. "Our first night together will be unforgettable." Chapter 3. The First Night. The marriage ceremony had passed in a blur, an overwhelming mix of alien traditions, strange rituals, and unsettling grandeur. Ronan felt like he was moving through a dream, or rather, a nightmare that he couldn't wake from. The Zurai palace was filled with alien dignitaries, all observing with cold, emotionless eyes as he and Princess Vera were bound together in a union that felt more like a business transaction than a marriage. As they stood in front of the massive gathering in the royal chamber, Vera's expression remained unreadable. Her strange, black orbs of eyes reflected the light in unsettling ways, and her lips stretched into that wide, toothy grin again. Ronan couldn't look at her for more than a few seconds without feeling a chill run down his spine. The ceremony had involved many strange customs at one point. They were each presented with a glowing crystal, which they had to crush between their hands, signifying the melding of their souls. Ronan's hand throbbed painfully afterward, his skin still tingling from the odd energy the crystal had released. But what troubled him most wasn't the physical pain, it was the feeling of dread that gnawed at him the entire time. A cold certainty that something was deeply wrong. As the ceremony ended, the Zurai nobles clapped their hands in unison, a gesture that Ronan assumed was their version of applause. Vera stood tall beside him, her posture regal, as if she were a queen addressing her subjects. Ronan barely noticed when the emissary announced that they were officially married. It didn't feel real. But reality soon set in as he was escorted to the private quarters he would now share with Princess Vera. The chamber was enormous, like everything in the Zurai palace. The walls were made of that same shimmering crystal that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light, casting soft reflections across the room. A massive, circular bed dominated the center of the space, its surface draped in luxurious fabrics that shimmered like liquid metal. Ronan stood in the middle of the room, feeling like a prisoner awaiting his sentence. The air was thick with tension, and his mind was a chaotic mess of fear, confusion, and disbelief. He had married a woman he didn't know, a woman whose appearance filled him with dread, and now he was expected to spend the night with her. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Vera stepped inside, her tall, imposing figure casting a long shadow across the room. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her tendril-like hair shifting slightly as she approached him. There was a strange energy in the air, a subtle hum that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Ronan's throat tightened as she came to stand before him. He could feel the weight of her gaze, those black, soulless eyes studying him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "You seem uneasy," she said, her voice soft and melodic, yet somehow chilling. "Are you afraid of me?" Ronan's mouth felt dry, and he struggled to find his voice. "I know, it's not that. I don't know what to expect." Vera's grin widened slightly, and she reached out, her long fingers brushing against his arm. Her touch was surprisingly cold, sending a shiver through him. "You fear the unknown," she said, her voice taking on a soothing, almost hypnotic tone. "That is natural. But there is nothing to fear, Ronan. We are bound together now, by fate and by the will of our people." Ronan swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "But why me? Why did you choose me?" Vera's expression softened slightly, and she tilted her head as if considering his question. "Because you are human. Your species is unique, resilient, adaptable. I have watched your kind from afar, and I believe that you, more than any other, can help me achieve what I seek." Ronan frowned, his heart racing. "And what is it you seek?" Her smile widened, revealing rows of sharp, gleaming teeth. "Freedom." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and Ronan's confusion deepened. Freedom? From what? Vera's eyes seemed to darken, and for a moment, a shadow passed over her face. "From the chains of tradition. From the expectations of my people. You see, Ronan, I was never meant to rule. My father, the Emperor, sees me as a failure. He believes that because of my appearance, I am unworthy of the throne. But I have other plans. And you, my husband, will help me execute them." Ronan took a step back, his mind racing. "What do you mean? What do you expect me to do?" Vera's tendrils twitched slightly, and she took a step closer to him. "You are my partner now, Ronan. Together, we will break free from the limitations that have been placed upon us. You may not realize it yet, but you have a power within you, a strength that I intend to harness." Ronan's pulse quickened. He didn't know what she was talking about. Power? Strength? He was just an ordinary man, an engineer who had been dragged into this bizarre situation against his will. What could he possibly offer her? "I don't understand," he said, shaking his head. "I'm just a human. I don't have any special abilities." Vera's grin widened further, and her eyes glinted with a strange, unsettling light. "Oh, but you do, Ronan. You humans are far more powerful than you realize. It's why I chose you. It's why the Zurai have been watching your kind for so long. We need you, Ronan. You are the key to our survival." Ronan's mind reeled. The key to their survival? What was she talking about? None of this made any sense. "I don't understand," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Vera placed a hand on his chest, her touch cold and firm. You will in time. But for now, let us focus on tonight. This is our first night as husband and wife, and I intend to make it unforgettable. A chill ran down Ronan's spine as her words sank in. He had dreaded this moment, the idea of being alone with her, of what might happen between them. But there was something else in her tone now, something that hinted at a deeper, more dangerous agenda. Vera's hand slid from his chest to his arm, and she guided him toward the bed. Ronan's legs felt like lead, but he followed her, unable to resist the pull of her strange, magnetic presence. As they reached the bed, Vera stopped and turned to face him. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and her expression softened once more. Do not be afraid, she whispered. I will not harm you. We are partners, after all. Ronan swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what to expect. He didn't know what she was capable of, or what her true intentions were. But there was something in her gaze, something that both terrified and intrigued him. He knew, deep down, that this night would change everything. Vera slowly removed her robes, revealing the full extent of her alien form. Her body was covered in that same mottled gray skin, with patches of rough, scaly texture along her shoulders and hips. Her limbs were long and slender, almost insect-like in their structure, and her movements were unervingly graceful. Ronan's breath caught in his throat as she stepped closer to him, her tendrils brushing against his face. He wanted to pull away, to retreat into the safety of the unknown, but something held him in place. Do not fear me, Vera whispered again, her voice a soft melody in the darkness. We are bound, you and I. Tonight, you will see. With those words, she leaned in closer, her lips hovering just inches from his. Ronan's mind screamed at him to run, to escape this alien creature and the strange world he had been thrust into. But his body refused to move. He was frozen, caught in the web of her presence, unable to tear himself away. And then, she kissed him. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Her lips were cold, yet electric, sending a jolt of energy through his entire body. For a moment, the fear melted away, replaced by something else, something he couldn't quite understand. And then everything went black. Chapter 4. The Awakening. Ronan woke with a start, his body jerking upright as if pulled by invisible strings. For a moment, he was disoriented, his mind struggling to grasp where he was and what had happened. The room was still bathed in the same soft, ambient glow from the crystalline walls, but something felt different. He sat there, breathing heavily, trying to piece together the fragmented memories of the night before. His body felt strange, almost foreign to him. He clenched his hands, noticing an odd sense of strength in his muscles and energy that hadn't been there before. It was as if his entire body had been recharged, revitalized, but also altered in ways he couldn't quite understand. His heart pounded in his chest as flashes of the previous night came rushing back. Vera's cold, electric touch, her whispered words, and the kiss that had sent him spiraling into unconsciousness. He had expected to wake up feeling disturbed, repulsed, even horrified by what had transpired. But instead, he felt powerful, alert. Every nerve in his body tingled with heightened awareness, and his senses seemed sharper than ever before. The air felt different. He could hear the faint hum of the palace's energy systems, something he had never noticed before. He could see the subtle shifts in light patterns across the walls, as if his vision had expanded beyond its normal limits. And there was something else, a presence, a connection that lingered in his mind, faint but unmistakable. It was Vera. He could feel her, even though she wasn't in the room. What is this? He whispered to himself, staring down at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Before he could contemplate further, the door to the chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Ronan tensed, his heightened senses kicking in. He knew, instinctively, who it was before she even stepped into view. Princess Vera stood at the threshold, her tall, imposing figure casting a long shadow across the room. She was dressed in a different set of regal robes, this time adorned with shimmering threads that seemed to pulse with energy. Her tendrils moved lazily, as if responding to some unseen rhythm in the air. Her black, soulless eyes fixed on him, but there was something different in her gaze this time, something almost possessive. How do you feel, husband? She asked, her voice smooth and melodic, though it carried a hint of something darker. Ronan blinked, trying to gather his thoughts. I don't know. Something feels off, different. Vera's lips curled into that unsettling grin, revealing her sharp, gleaming teeth. Good. It means the process is working. Ronan's heart skipped a beat. Process? What did you do to me? Vera moved closer, her towering form making him feel small and vulnerable despite the new energy coursing through his veins. She reached out, placing a cold hand on his chest. The touch was familiar, but this time, there was a sense of control, like she was testing him, probing for something within him. I told you last night, Ronan, she said softly. You possess a power within you, one that I needed to unlock. That kiss, our union, was the catalyst. Ronan's mind raced, struggling to comprehend her words. What are you talking about? I'm just an engineer. I don't have any power. Vera's eyes glinted with amusement, and she leaned in closer, her breath cold against his skin. You underestimate yourself, Ronan. The Zurai have long known of the hidden potential within the human genome. Your people, you are far more than you realize. That is why I chose you. His pulse quickened. What do you mean, hidden potential? What have you done to me? Vera straightened, her expression growing more serious. Your body has been awakened, husband. The energy that flows through me now flows through you as well. You are no longer just human. You are something more. Ronan shook his head, stepping back from her. This doesn't make any sense. I didn't agree to this. Vera's gaze hardened. You agreed when you married me. Our bond is not just ceremonial, it is biological. We are now connected, you and I, in ways that transcend mere words. Ronan's head spun. Biological bond? What had she done to him? He could feel the changes, the heightened awareness, the strange power that pulsed beneath his skin, but it terrified him. This wasn't what he wanted. He had been dragged into this marriage, forced into a political alliance, and now he was something else, something he didn't understand. You had no right, Ronan said, his voice trembling with anger. You had no right to do this to me. Vera's face darkened, her tendrils twitching as she regarded him coldly. I had every right, Ronan. You are my husband, bound to me by Zurai law. Your fate is tied to mine, whether you accept it or not. Ronan clenched his fists, the surge of unfamiliar strength coursing through him. He wanted to fight back, to resist whatever it was she had done to him. But deep down, he knew she was right. He was bound to her now, in ways he couldn't yet understand. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. What do you want from me? What's the purpose of all this? Vera's expression softened slightly, and she stepped closer, her cold hand once again resting on his chest. I want freedom, Ronan. For both of us. My father, the Emperor, seeks to control me. He sees me as nothing more than a political pawn, a tool to further his ambitions. But I will not be his puppet. With you by my side, we can break free from his grasp and take control of our own destiny. Ronan's brow furrowed. And how am I supposed to help with that? Vera's eyes glinted with determination. You possess something the Zurai lack, something vital. Human adaptability. Your ability to survive, to overcome obstacles, is unparalleled. With the power I've given you, combined with your natural human resilience, we can forge a new path, one that neither the Emperor nor the Zurai Council can stop. Ronan's mind raced as he processed her words. Human adaptability? Resilience? It was true that humans had a reputation for surviving in the harshest of conditions, but he had never thought of it as a power. And now, with whatever energy Vera had infused him with, he felt different, stronger, more capable. But it was still overwhelming, and the thought of being dragged into a political struggle on an alien world terrified him. He took a step back, shaking his head. I didn't ask for this, Vera. I don't want to be part of your plans for rebellion or whatever this is. Vera's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, there was a flicker of anger in her expression. But it quickly faded, replaced by a calm, calculating look. I understand your fear, Ronan. This is all new to you. But you will see in time that this is the only way forward for both of us. Ronan clenched his fists again, trying to control the surge of energy that pulsed through him. He didn't know what to believe anymore. Everything had happened so fast, and now he was caught in the middle of a conflict he barely understood. I need time, he muttered, turning away from her. I need time to process all of this. Vera watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable. You will have time, Ronan. But do not forget that we are bound together. There is no escaping that." With those words, she turned and left the chamber, leaving Ronan standing there, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. As the door closed behind her, Ronan sat down on the edge of the bed, his hands shaking. He could feel the power inside him, the strange energy that had been awakened by Vera's touch. But he didn't know what to do with it. He didn't know who he was anymore. All he knew was that his life had changed forever and there was no going back. Over the next few days, Ronan struggled to come to terms with the changes within him. Vera had given him space, allowing him time to adjust to his new reality, but the weight of their connection lingered in his mind. He could feel her presence even when she wasn't around, as if a part of her was always with him. He also began to notice other changes. His reflexes were faster, his strength greater. He could process information more quickly, and his senses were heightened to the point where he could hear the faintest whispers of conversations happening far away. It was as if his entire body had been upgraded, made more efficient, more powerful. But with that power came a growing sense of unease. Vera had said that he was part of her plan for rebellion against the Emperor, but what did that mean for him? He had no desire to be caught in the middle of an intergalactic conflict. He just wanted to go back to his old life, to the simple days of working as an engineer on Orion 3. But there was no going back. Not now. Not ever. As he paced the room, lost in thought, a sharp knock on the door startled him. Before he could answer, the door slid open, and one of the Zurai emissaries stepped inside. "The princess has requested your presence," the emissary said, his tone cold and formal. "She is waiting for you in the throne room." Ronan's heart raced. What did Vera want now? Was this the moment when her plans would finally be revealed? Taking a deep breath, he followed the emissary out of the chamber and down the long, winding corridors of the palace. His mind raced with questions, but he forced himself to stay calm. Whatever was coming next, he had to be ready. When they finally reached the throne room, Ronan felt a chill run down his spine. The room was massive, with towering pillars of crystal and a raised platform at the far end where the Zurai throne sat. But it wasn't the grandeur of the room that unsettled him, it was the presence of the Zurai Emperor himself, seated on the throne, his eyes locked onto Ronan with an intensity that made his blood run cold. And standing beside the Emperor, her eyes gleaming with cold determination, was Princess Vera. "Welcome, Ronan," the Emperor said, his voice deep and commanding. "We have much to discuss." Ronan's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that the true battle was just beginning.